This is not obstructing it, no? This is okay?
Good morning. Namaste. We welcome you all for the 5th day of Integral Yoga Week. We'll start with 3 chant of Om and then we go for introduction. Welcome, ma'am. And our Secretary of Honorable Jayanti, Ravi, is a scientist, civil servant, writer, speaker, educator, performing vocalist and thinker with a master's degree in nuclear physics from University of Madras, an MPA from Harvard University, and PhD in e-governance. She has authored books published in international journals, guided doctoral students, and also been a visiting faculty at Harvard University. A PhD holder in e-governance and master in nuclear physics, she was serving since 2017 as Principal Secretary in Health and Family Welfare Department of Gujarat Government. Now we have ma'am here serving in Auroville under Mother and Sri Aurobindo's light. We welcome you, ma'am. Please.
Thank you. Namaste, Vanakkam, good morning, greetings to all our sisters and brothers who are watching this, not only here but across India and other parts of the world. Let's start with a chant of the Sri Aurobindo Gayatri. And I would like to welcome those of you who feel comfortable. If you feel like joining, you're most welcome. Tatsaviturvaram Rupam Jyotihi Parasya Dhimahi Yanna Satyena Deepaye Satyena Deepaye Om Tat Saviturvaram Rupam Jyotihi Parasya Dhimahi Yanna Satyena Deepayet Satyena Deepayet. I'm sure all of you know of the Sri Aurobindo Gayatri, but basically it means, or it's an ahvahan, an invitation to meditate on the most auspicious form of the sun of spiritual truth, and with a prayer that that light may illumine us with the truth, all dimensions of our beings. The topic that has been given to me, of course, I have taken the liberty of slightly modifying it, slightly changing it because it's also about heralds of the supramental world, the future and you. I also thought the sunlit path that Sri Aurobindo has so beautifully expressed, written about, and if we looked at it also from the words, songs, thoughts, and works of several mystical poets and saints of India across the length and breadth of the country, across time, and see how all of these point to that truth which is so simple, so appears so much within our reach, and yet can sometimes be so elusive and elusive. And if we start with the future and you, for each one of us, I think there is something which is very, very simple, very basic that we can follow, which has been the basis of the Ishavasya Upanishad. The fact that there is just one, there is just a unity which pervades everything, every being, each one of us. And if that understanding is there, and when that is understood, as in Ishavasya Upanishad, Yasmin sarvani bhutan yatmaiva abhut vijanatah. When you know that in all the beings there is that single ekatvam, tatra ko moha ka shoka ekatvam anupashyatah. So what delusion, sorrow is there for the wise one who sees unity of existence and perceives all beings and things as one's own self? And just as we start this conversation, I've been given a very, very liberal time today, Uma and the team here at Savitri Bhavan, and I deem it a very special privilege to literally sit in the lap of Mother under the beautiful gaze of Sri Aurobindo, who's right in front, and with people here who've all consecrated their lives for something very special. And so I thought I would walk you through several experiences of mine, things I have read over time and which I'm still. We're all on the path, we're all seekers, maybe some maybe a little ahead, some behind, but I think there's no room there for any ego, but we're all on this basic quest, search, aspiring for the divine. There's a charming story that several years, maybe 2 decades ago, I had come across, and this is something that left me understand the Ishavasya Upanishad even better. Sometimes these Upanishads, they have a meaning, the grammar, words, language. It might be clear, you may understand the translation, but then for it to really click there and make you feel that, yeah, I got it, that aha moment, there's something that's needed. I'll tell you who the story is attributed to later, and maybe some of you may be able to recognize it. It's a beautiful story of a person who was a bit of a seeker-like, not unlike all of us. And he was also somebody who was learned, a wise person who knew Sanskrit and who was actually trying to translate the Ishavasya Upanishad. So he went to his own teacher and asked him that I need to understand this. I'm able to do the translation. It's coming, the translation is happening, but then it's not touching me. It's not making me understand the real essence of it. There's something not still clear. So the teacher looks at him, and in a hall which had a lot of people around him, he said, just go to a certain person's house, his maid will explain it to you. So this person is a little foxed, he scratches his head. But the faith, the surrender that he had in his teacher makes him realize that, let me implicitly try it out, there must be something. And so true to it, a few days later, he goes back then to Bombay, and he's at the house of this friend of his. And some say the morning he was doing his puja, or some say he was just having a little nap in the morning, having woken up early, he was resting. And he hears a beautiful song. Some person there singing a song, he didn't quite hear the meaning and words, but it was so very beautiful that he woke up and went out and found that this was a young girl. She was the sister of the servant there who used to help. Back then there was this system of domestic help, even now. She was called Namya, and she was wearing a torn and tattered sari. But she was actually talking about a beautiful pink sari. It's a coincidence that I'm wearing a pink one today. It was not planned, believe me, just a coincidence. But she's talking about a beautiful sari and how the sari would give her happiness and so on. And this man is so touched. He says that she is absolutely poor by our yardsticks of happiness, joy. She is in tattered clothes. She's also doing all the housework. She's busy running, cleaning the vessels, doing all of this. And how is it that she's so happy? And he actually takes pity on her, which we do, isn't it? Sometimes a little bit of ego in us makes us want to empathize or rather sympathize with people like this. So he takes a little bit of pity and says that next day when there's somebody who comes to honor him with, special clothes because he's a learned savant, he says, can you also get a little sari for this girl? And they get it. She wears the sari. She's offered the sari. She wears it. And she's again overjoyed. And this is from Maharashtra. So is there anyone here who understands Marathi? So she does. This girl is so overjoyed. She's strutting about the house like a peacock in the sari. Not very different from what she was the previous day. But it's just that she's now clothed in this sari. And she does what is called fugari. Fugari means you hold hands like this and go round and round with the other girl working there. She's happy. But she continues doing all the work, cleaning vessels, mopping the house, sweeping the house, doing all that she has to do. And then this continues. The next day, she's put her brand new sari back into a trunk, safely kept it there, and she again is back in her good old tattered clothes. But again, that spirit of complete happiness, 6 inches above the ground, jumping, happily singing, doing all her work. It really foxes this man. He says, how come? I mean, I have everything. Why is it that I can't taste this happiness? And then he understands what is it that was conveyed by his teacher. The divine pervades everything. The tattered piece of rag that she was wearing, the beautiful sari that she was wearing, the work that she was doing, the vessels that she was caressing, touching, cleaning, everything. And that understanding that the simple girl who was a servant maid in a house had, perhaps with all the knowledge, the learning that he had, maybe sometimes our ego or our understanding also disconnects us from some of this. And that was a great aha moment of truth for him. And then he goes back, and this is, can any of you guess which story does this refer to? Which is the saint that I'm referring to? Sant Tukaram, Uma, no, but you're close to it. Somebody else who's very sort of popular across India today, Shirdi Sai Baba. Have you all heard of him? And so when you read the Sai Satcharitra, there is a chapter, I think chapter 20, 21, where the story is explained. And it always makes me realize that things can be so simple and we complicate it with a lot of things. And this is something that Narsi Mehta, another great saint from what is today's Gujarat, he says, Akhila Brahmandama Ekatu Shri Hari. What it means is that in the entire Brahmanda, who is that one? Unity, the Supreme. And he also uses a very affectionate word. He doesn't say aap. Aap is a very respectful, distant word. He says tu, not even tum. To say that you, my dear, my friend, you are that single unity that pervades everything. And back here, we have a great saint in Tamil Nadu who lived called Tayumanavar. He says something exactly, so which is to say that these ideas are endorsed, resonated, they sort of repeat. It's not that there's any difference. This truth is, a canonical truth is sort of reflected every now and then. He says, Parkum idam ellam, Parkum idam engum, oru neekamara nirahindra paripurana anandame. So he says there is this paripurna anandam or joy. And where is it? Parkum idam yellam, parkum idam yengum. Wherever I set my eyes on this, on a person. So there's nothing like me and the other, because everything, every being, everything is nothing but a spark of the same divine, a spark of my own self. And that is what Ishavasya Upanishad said, ekatvam. And as we now come to our presiding deities that we all so fondly and so greatly admire, we try to imbibe their teachings, practice it. This is a little book that you all must be very familiar with, right? And this is probably the best food for the soul that all of us go back to almost every day, several times a day. So we have a kind of a satsang that happens in my office almost every day. Before meetings, after meetings, we try and read little experts from, and this is probably the most effective and most nourishing book that I think, and such a small book, but so very powerful, isn't it? So it's, for those of you who are not familiar, it's a book called The Mother, written by Sri Aurobindo, and I wouldn't remember the date, but perhaps August 1, 1927 is when he has signed it, and apparently the mother too has signed it. It's jointly written by both of them. And this is one particular paragraph which I think gives the gist of what it is that we're talking about when we refer to the sunlit path, the future in me. It's something very simple and it's within our reach. What is it that stops us from becoming that Namya that we just spoke about, that little servant maid? What is it? So these are questions we might want to keep with ourselves. And here, Sri Aurobindo says the same thing in an even more beautiful, simple way for many of us to understand, absorb, imbibe, practice. The more complete your faith, sincerity, and surrender, the more will grace and protection be with you. And when the grace and protection of the Divine Mother are with you, what is there that can touch you, or whom need you fear? A little of it even will carry you through all difficulties, obstacles, and dangers. Surrounded by its full presence, you can go securely on your way because it is hers, careless of all menace, unaffected by any hostility, however powerful, whether from the world's or from the world's invisible. Its touch can turn difficulties into opportunities, failure into success, and weakness into unfaltering strength. For the grace of the Divine Mother is the sanction of the Supreme, and now or tomorrow its effect is sure, a thing decreed, inevitable, and irresistible. As I shared, I thought I would draw connections between some of their writings and some of the mystic poets of India, some of them of earlier times, some contemporary, who have sung and given the same message. The languages may be different. Not all of you may be familiar, pardon me for that, but I think music itself is a very powerful language, isn't it? It can really touch our hearts, our souls. So, echoing this idea, there's a very beautiful small Tamil song, which I thought I would, it's not very popular, but then this is a song that I have really loved. It's composed by a poet, again a mystic poet, but who is not very well known, a more recent one. And it's about the Divine Mother. I'll try to explain it maybe after the song, if there is something that is not clear. ஒரு கோடி சந்திரனின் ஒளியானவள், ஒரு கோடி சந்திரனின் ஒளியானவள், உலகாளும் ஞானாட்சி வடிவானவள், கருவாக்கி உருவாக்கி நம்மை காப்பவள், காலம் எல்லாம் நமக்கு துணையானவள், நாதத்திலே கலந்த இசையானவள், நான் என்ற மமதைக்கு எதிரானவள், வேதத்திலே இருக்கும் பொருளானவள், வேதனையை தீர்க்கும் மருந்தானவள், குறையாத அருள் வழங்கும் குருவானவள், குலம் காத்து நம்மை காப்பும் திருவானவள், ஓம் என்ற மந்திரத்தின் பொருளானவள், ஊனாகி உடலாகி உயிரானவள், பூவாகி காயாகி கனியானவள், பொங்கி வரும் கடலின் வடிவானவள், சேயாக்கி நம்மை அடுத்து சீராட்டுவாள், சேயாக்கி நம்மை அடுத்து சீராட்டுவாள், சிந்தையெல்லாம் குளிர தாலாட்டுவாள், ஒரு கோடி சந்திரனின் ஒளியானவள், உலகாளும் ஞானாட்சி வடிவானவள். This describes the mother, how she has the light of 1 crore. For those of you who are not familiar with the Indian system, I'm sure all of you are, 1 crore magnificent moons. And then goes on to say how she is at the root of music, Veda, the secret of the Vedas, she is all the different, and how she's like a mother. Also, there is the infinitesimal, where they talk of the 1,001 crore suns, but also the infinitesimal, the infinite, and the infinitesimal, where they say she is like a mother who's actually rocking us to sleep and who takes care of everything. So these are the attributes of the Divine Mother. And in the same book, Sri Aurobindo goes on to say, when we talk of the sunlit path, what kind of a metamorphosis, what kind of a transformation can we aspire to do? Because the transformation is always kripa sadhya. It happens with her grace. But there is nevertheless some purusharth, something that we too have to put in, our effort, our aspiration. And he says, if you want to be a true doer of divine works, your first aim must be to be totally free from all desire and self-regarding ego. All your life must be an offering and a sacrifice to the Supreme. Your only object in action shall be to serve, to receive, to fulfill, to become a manifesting instrument of the divine Shakti in her works. You must grow in the divine consciousness till there is no difference between your will and hers. No motive except her impulsion in you, no action that is not her conscious action in you and through you. And probably this is what inspired another great mystic princess, mystic queen, mystic saint of India, from what is called the present-day Rajasthan, from that part. I'll come to Andal. I saw your expression. You were probably looking at Andal. We'll come to Andal in a little while, but this is Andal's, the equivalent of Andal in the north, Meera. She says something very beautiful. There are many, many songs that Meera has composed. In this particular song, she goes on to say, Main Hari Charanan ki dasi. I am at the feet. I am a servant, a devotee of the feet, the lotus feet of Hari, the divine. And then she says, Dukh, Apaman, Kasht, Sab Sahiya. Dukha is sadness, Apaman is insult, hardships. I have borne all of it, and the laughter of the cruel world. Not very unfamiliar, no, to many of us. So this is, well, if you are on the path, this would be a part, so to make us feel that we're not alone, but this is something that men and women, great men and women across time and space, across the world have endured. But she then goes to say, but she realizes that there is hasi. Hasi is the Hindi word for derisive laughter. But she says in all of that, there is only one Vasi. And who is that? Her beloved Krishna. दुख अपमान कष्ट सब सहिया कुटिल जगत की हासे दुख अपमान कष्ट सब सहिया कुटिल जगत की हासे मीरा कहे प्रभु गिरिधर नागर मीरा कहे प्रभु गिरिधर नागर सारो जगत के वासी सारो जगत के वासी जन्म जन्म की दासी मैं हरि चरणन की दासी मैं हरि चरणन की दासी मैं हरि चरणन की दासी And so these are all different signatures that we see of the same divine, the same truth that is found in different cultures, different similes, different languages, metaphor. But I think the most important aspect of this whole sunlit path, and that mother, there's a beautiful book that I got from France a few days back, and I found again it a treasure house of many beautiful things that deeply resonate. And I'll start with the sentence that Mother has said on the last page of this book. And I think it's so important to remember this. And there is also a special reference to Auroville. And you will know what is the reference, where is the reference as you see this. Mother says, at the center, there is a being free, vast, and knowing, who awaits our discovery and who ought to become the active center of our being and our life in Auroville. And oftentimes, the crystal at the center of Matru Mandir perhaps symbolizes that psychic being in terms of size compared to the 5 square kilometer area of the entire city. The size of that crystal as a proportion may be absolutely tiny, but that is that little source, pulsating source of the divine spark that Mother refers to, and most important. And this same concept is something that Tulsi Das ji also says in his famous song, Shri Ram Chandra Kripalu Bhajamana. He says, Mama Hridaya Kanja Nivasa Kuru Kamadi Kaladala Ganjanam. So he says he invites and invokes the divine to come and be seated in the lotus seat of his heart and also destroy all those evil tendencies or wrong tendencies of anger, desire, greed, which we human beings are prone to, isn't it? This journey is about slowly getting over it. And in that sense, this is again a metaphor that you find in different the songs, the words of different saints of India. And here there is something that I also wanted to share. Mother had a lot of faith, and given that there would be a lot of devotees who would come to her from different parts of the world, and also given that many of us had a kind of Western upbringing, Western education, it was likely that our intellect would be a little more pronounced, and we would not be able to push aside the intellect and directly be able to perceive things with the heart. So she says this, which I thought is so beautiful. From the spiritual point of view, India is the foremost country in the world. Her mission is to set the example of spirituality. Sri Aurobindo came on earth to teach this to the world. This fact is so obvious that a simple and ignorant peasant here is, in his heart, closer to the divine than the intellectuals of Europe. And that includes also many of us, the so-called educated people living anywhere on earth today, because we tend to function more from the space of our intellect. All those who want to become Aurovillians, she adds, must know this and behave accordingly, otherwise they are unworthy of being Aurovillians. So on that note again, the fact that we are situated in Tamil Nadu, and there's a great poet saint, a poet more than a saint. He was a saint, but known more as a freedom fighter, someone who was a revolutionary, a poet of Tamil, who also had a deep connect with Sri Aurobindo. In fact, there are many interesting stories. Sri Aurobindo would love the sambar made at his home with papad, and it is believed that he would carry it, especially his wife would make it. And you know who is this poet? A sleep check question. Subramanya Bharati. And there's another interesting story. You've all left your chappals outside today, your footwear, and come in. Do you know that once Subramanya Bharati ran or took away Sri Aurobindo's footwear? Have you heard of this beautiful anecdote? So we don't know if it was completely an unintended mistake or whether it was a bit of mischief. They were close friends, so they could do this, take these liberties. And then Sri Aurobindo doesn't mind it at all, and he probably writes to his brother, if I'm right, to ask for a little bit of money to be able to buy another pair of chappals for himself. So that's the kind of friendship they had, which was beyond formalities, beyond all those niceties. He says the same thing in a very beautiful song. Those of you who feel like joining are most welcome. Oli padaitha kandinai va va va. My mother is also here, Amma. You can also probably, if you feel like, join in. Oli padaitha kanninai va va va. You can at least say va va va. What is va va va? You, having lived in Auroville and Tamil Nadu for so long, what is va va? So you're just saying Oli padaitha kanninai, with eyes that are shining with light, the same light of the divine. Oli padaitha kanninai va va va. Urudhi konda nenjinai va va va. Kadipadaitha mozhiyinai va va va. Kadumai konda tholinai va va va. Tedimai petra madinai va va va. Sirumai kandu ponguvai va va va. Elimai kandu iranguvai va va va. Yeru pol nadayinai va va va. Ilaya bharadattinai va va va. Edirilaavalattinai va va va. ஒளியிழந்த நாட்டிலே நின்றேறும் உதயநாயரொப்பவே வா வா வா. களையிழைந்த நாட்டிலே முன்போலே கலை சிறைக்க வந்தனை வா வா வா. விளையும் அன்பு யாவையும் பார்த்தன் போல் விழியினாய் விளக்குவாய். விழியினாய் விளக்குவாய் va va va. So it's a clarion call that Subramanya Bharati gives to all the people of India back then, there has been time which has gone, but it's not very different, isn't it, from what it is today? It's the same. We may have got freedom, but are we truly liberated? Have we really gotten over the true enemies within us? The answer is perhaps it's work in progress. We are still not there, but we are trying. And so this is again something beautiful that Bharatiyar has given all of us. Mother also says, a beautiful, because these are the future in you. So to say the sunlit path is not something which is very complex, very difficult, something where you have to break stones, sweat it out. It's something which can be very easy, very happy, simple. So simplicity sometimes is far more powerful than the most complicated things. So Mother again gives us these little nuggets of gold, nuggets of whatever is the most precious thing. She says, let my one aspiration be to know thee and to serve thee better every day. I think, and let me do in the best way I can, the best thing to do. And I think all of us who are in this process of genuinely trying to perform our bit in this whole journey, I think these small things like this, they're huge energy tonics, isn't it? These little words, these little aphorisms, these little sentences give us so much of strength to be in the sunlit path. There's something else that Mother says about true spirituality in the context of Auroville too, for the whole world, but for us especially, because we have to be the beacons. We have to be the lighthouse that she wants the whole of India, the whole of the world, then to be able to also emulate. This is not for us to be in a time warp and believe that we have arrived. Sometimes you might find that there are centers of excellence across the world. So this is not a special inheritance, legacy, privilege of just us. I think divinity is there everywhere in the most unexpected of places, unusual places too. Mother says, true spirituality lies in the service of the divine work. To refuse to work for all is only a demonstration of selfishness and has no spiritual value. The first thing to do to be able to live in Auroville is to consent to free oneself from one's ego. Simple statement, and this is also something that we hear from Mirabai again. She says something very simple, Chakar rakhoji, right? She says, keep me as your servant. And then there's a very beautiful paragraph there in it, which is not often sung. She says, Unche unche mahal banasu, vich rakhun bari, right? So she's not talking of small pieces of work alone. So we all can take the courage, gather the courage to build big things, build a city, build big buildings, palaces, all of it, in whatever form. It's not just the physical, it's a metaphor. You could be writing great books, doing great programs, helping resolve conflict, and doing things that for you, I think everything is very important. And then she says, Savariya ke darshan pasu, peher kasumbi sari. She says, again, it's of joy and celebration, wearing a beautiful, kasumbi is the color. What is kasumbi? It's the color of a particular flower which comes during Holi. It's a kind of saffron, something like the color that Leva is wearing today. A nice, beautiful, she says, Meera says, I'll wear that and have the darshan, have the, what should we say, I will see, have a chance to look at the divine. ऊंचे ऊंचे महल बनासूं विच विच राखूं बारी ऊंचे ऊंचे महल बनासूं विच विच राखूं बारी सांवरिया के दर्शन पासूं सांवरिया के दर्शन पासूं पहर कसुंबी साड़ी मने चाकर राखो जी चाकर राखो चाकर राखो चाकर राखो जी मन चाकर राखो जी. And So this is she also goes on to talk about different kinds of work that happens in Vrindavan, not very different. And after all, her name was the same as our own mother, the mother, Mira Alfasa. And I think it's the same message. She would say that all the works, and imagine a princess who had everything going for her. She gives everything up to wander. She's thrown out of her kingdom because people are uncomfortable with this fact, because there are very strict hierarchies there and they don't want to see the queen sort of being divinely in a state of madness, completely gripped by this madness for the divine. And so she's driven out of there. And then, but we see how she takes it all in her stride, like that little girl, Namya. She's not worried about it. She's happy in comfort, lack of comfort, all of it. Now we look at a small reading where Mother talks about the sunlit path. And I thought this is so important for the future and us, for what we're all here striving to do. The path is long, but self-surrender, I think this is the key word, isn't it? Self-surrender makes it short. The path is difficult, but perfect trust makes it easy. She goes on to elaborate, there are two paths of yoga, one of tapasya, discipline, and the other of surrender. The path of tapasya is arduous. Here you rely solely upon yourself. You proceed by your own strength. You ascend and achieve according to the measure of your force. There's always the danger of falling down, and once you fall, you lie broken in the abyss, and there is hardly a remedy. The other path, the path of surrender, is safe and sure. It is here, however, that the Western people find their difficulty. And Western people includes all of us again, because we've all been educated with an emphasis on the intellect. They have been taught to fear and avoid all that threatens their personal independence. They have imbibed with their mother's milk the sense of individuality, and surrender means giving up all that. In other words, you may follow, as Ramakrishna says, either the path of the baby monkey or that of the baby cat. So what is the baby monkey's path? Who would like to share? Hold on to the mother. That's called Markata Nyaya or Markata, the approach. So the agency of holding on to the mother is by whom? By the baby, by the monkey. Whereas either the path of the baby monkey or that of the baby cat. How does a baby cat? So the baby cat is absolutely mast, bindas, carefree, doesn't worry. And whose responsibility is it to hold and take? Mother's. So which one would we prefer? Do we want to be monkeys? Monkey-like or cat-like? So that's called marjara. Markata is the monkey approach, where the monkey is putting in that effort, and marjara is the cat-like effort. The baby monkey holds to its mother in order to be carried about, and it must hold firm. Otherwise, if it loses its grip, it falls. On the other hand, the baby cat does not hold on to its mother, but is held by the mother and has no fear nor responsibility. It has nothing to do but to let the mother hold it and cry. What does it cry? Meow, meow. Huh? If you take, Mother has written this, I'm quoting her, liberty. If you take up this path of surrender fully and sincerely, there is no more danger or serious difficulty. The question is to be sincere. If you're not sincere, do not begin yoga. If you're dealing in human affairs, then you could resort to deception, but in dealing with the divine, there is no possibility of deception anywhere. You can go on the path safely when you are candid and open to the core, and when your only end is to realize and attain the divine and to be moved by the divine. So this is again something that has been echoed. Mother has given this essence so beautifully. This has been echoed again by several mystic saints and poets across India. There's another poet, he's also one of my favorites from modern day Punjab. Who is that? Somebody who founded a religion there. Guru Nanak Dev, right? Now, it will surprise a lot of you to know that Guru Nanak Dev was the founder of the Sikh religion, and you must be knowing of people who are known as Sardarjis, Sardars, who belong to the Sikh religion. But it will also fascinate you to know that this religion that he sort of founded was based again on a great deal of inclusiveness. Although it was there, located in a geographical part, a certain language, the Guru Granth Sahib, which is their sort of holy book, which is worshipped in every Gurdwara and place of worship. I mean, I don't mean to bring in any religiosity or dogma, but just to say that these are messages which get repeated, resonate here and there to make it even more clear to us in different forms that this path is a sure, short, definite path for us. And the Guru Granth Sahib has included in it compositions of composers not only from the so-called Hindu side of religion, but also from the Islam side. There are some Sufi composers like Baba Farid, whose compositions are there. And back then, when the society was stratified, you did have the caste system. It will surprise all of us to know that it had compositions of Ravidas, who technically belonged to a community which was not considered a superior community. Not that we believe in it at all, but then there was a certain historical stratification. It also has compositions of people like Trilochan Shastri. Incidentally, Ravidas was also the guru of somebody. Whose guru was he? Yes, Mirabai's guru. So there again, so even the princess had, so divinity has no caste, no religion, no creed, no language barrier. It pervades, again, what Namya really realized, whether it was a tattered piece of sari or whether a beautiful sari, or these are all definitions of the world, but ultimately it is that one which pervades everything. And interestingly, it also has composers of different geographies, not just the northern part of India. It comes right up to Namdev. Namdev ji is from which part of India? Maharashtra, Abhangs. So the Guru Granth Sahib has all of these. And there's a very nice Shabad. I had the privilege of staying in Punjab during my formative school years, and I have learned some Shabads and Gurbanis. And there is this, they call it Shabad or Gurbani. Guru is the teacher, Bani is voice, Vani, Guruvani as we would say, but they call it Gurbani. And this says, again, it emphasizes this aspect of surrender. Ho vari vari jaun, Guru Gopala, mohe nirguna. I have a lot of flaws in me. Puranadate, will you make me complete? It's a beseeching, it's a surrender, it's a request, ardent request to the divine that I have my weaknesses, please make me complete. And then it goes on how uttat baithat, every moment of the day, as I get up, as I sit down, as I sleep, as I wake up, I want to have you firmly rooted in me. Every breath, may I be connected with you. This is in Rag Malkons, which is also known as Hindolam in the Carnatic. Ho vari vari jao Gur Gopala, ho vari vari jao Gur Gopala, mohinir gun tum puran date, mohinir gun tum puran date, Dinanath nihal, ho vari vari jao Gur Gopala. उठत बैठत सोवत जागत जी प्राण तन मन दर्शन प्यास बहुत मन मेरे नानक दरसनिहाल हो वारी वारी जाऊं गुरु गोपाला आनारी And then we come again to Sri Aurobindo, where he clarifies, because a lot of times we tend to believe our education has taught us no pains, no gains, isn't it? So we tend to feel that unless you rough it out, you sweat it out, you take beatings, well, that may also be a part of the journey, but that's not what it is. You're quite mistaken in thinking, I quote Sri Aurobindo, you're quite mistaken in thinking that the possibility of the sunlit path is a discovery of original invention of mine. He goes on, and then he says something about it was with that object that the mother once prayed to the divine that whatever difficulties, dangers, sufferings were necessary for the path might be laid on her rather than on others. So that's the supreme sacrifice Mother has done, so that those of us who put an entire and sincere confidence in her are able to follow the sunlit path, and even those who cannot, yet when they do put the trust, find their path suddenly easy, and if it becomes difficult again, it is only when distrust, revolt, abhiman or other darknesses come upon them. The sunlit path is not altogether a fable. And he says there's nothing spiritually wrong in being glad and cheerful. On the contrary, it is the right thing. So we don't have to go around with a very serious, sad demeanor of, carrying the cross on us, very difficult thing it can be. And there's a beautiful story of a young poetess, a young saint of India belonging to this part, close to this, Srivilliputtur, Andal. And yesterday in the office I was sharing the story. I think Holger was also there, and probably Rupali and Egle also, we all spoke about it. It's actually, it's a very sweet and a beautiful story. There is the temple priest. Many of you may know of the story, but I just thought I would nevertheless tell you the context of it. There's a temple priest there, and he would every day with great devotion pluck flowers from his garden, early in the morning wake up and make this beautiful garland and take it to offer it to the divine. And this was something that was going on for years. And he has a little daughter at home who's also grown up, nourished, nurtured on all these beautiful stories, this whole devotion, bhakti for Sri Krishna. And she is madly in love with Sri Krishna, devoted to him, not unlike Meera. This is a young girl. Now, a few days when this priest starts going to the temple and offering the garland on Sri Krishna, he finds a strand of hair on the garland. He's very, very upset, ashamed. He feels bad and says that, well, if I didn't take care to ensure that this garland was not in any way made sort of unworthy or something impure touched it, he feels very bad. He comes and the next day takes immense care to make sure that nothing like this happens. But again, when he goes and offers it to the Lord a little later, he sees a strand of hair shining through it. And again, it pricks him, pricks his heart. This happens for a few days. And then he really wants to get to the bottom of this. He says, why is this happening? I'm sure I'm taking all the care. So he makes the garland, and then he sort of hides behind and watches what is happening. And what happens? His little daughter comes running there. She again makes sure that the coast is clear, no one around watching. And out of a pure sense of devotion, like Shabri, who tasted the fruit and offered it, not with any sense of any ego or trying to do, she puts this garland on herself, and there's a nice mirror, and she sort of looks at it. She preens into the mirror, not looking at her face, but looking at the face of Sri Krishna. And she looks at it and she says, this is fine now. it's good enough for him, and she puts it down and she goes back. And the father is annoyed. He's angry, furious. He punishes her and tells her this is absolutely not on. But then, as the divine is so compassionate and so full of grace, he has a dream, and Krishna comes to him in the dream and says that, well, she is probably my most ardent devotee. Her devotion far, far outweighs what you are trying. This is not, there's no comparison in the world of divinity and sadhana. And would you believe it, Andar, although she's a young girl and she's a woman girl at that time, but she really breaks all those glass ceilings, and she is also counted in the Arvar saints in the category. So she's given that special pride of place as a great devotee of Sri Krishna. And there's a beautiful Tirupavai. She's composed 30 Tirupavais, that each one of them is so beautiful. And it is, it's full of celebration and joy, the sunlit path. It's not about crying, torturing oneself, or being depressed, sad. It's about enjoying every bit of being soaked in this true divine love for the Almighty. And in this song that she sings, it's a very beautiful song, and I thought it's so relevant for all of us. Goodare vellum Shir Govinda. So what she says is, even those who may be everybody is us. Essentially, there's no difference between us and the other. But sometimes at the worldly level, there might be some hostility. There might be some people who may believe that we are different and be a little hostile towards some of their other sisters and brothers. Have any of us experienced it? I think that's a part of life, isn't it? We all experience this every day from the time we're babies, probably. So in this hostility, she says, Gudare vellum. He has a way of winning over even that hostile force, or those hostile friends, sisters, brothers who are with us, not by any force, but by the absolutely most powerful force of love, divine love. And so she goes on, and she also says how I'm enjoying this celebration, this kind of beautiful journey where I just sing your songs, and I'm completely having a very, very abundant life in every possible way. I'm moving all over the world, singing praises to you and having good food, all of it, all the so-called. So Sri Aurobindo also goes on to say it's not about torturing yourself, living in poverty. So this is again talking of all that beauty, aesthetic, abundance, prosperity, all that is there in this song. Gudare vellum Shir Govinda, Gudare vellum Shir Govinda, Undannai paadipparai kondu Yam perum shammanam naadu pugalu Parisinal nandraga Shudagame tolvalaye tode Shevi puve padagame endranaya Palkalanum yam panivom Adai mudupom Adan pinne Pal shoru mudanai peide Murangai vazhi vara Kudiyirude Kulirdelorem pavai Gudare vellum Shir Govinda She also talks of eating very, very tasty food which has a lot of ghee in it. the ghee, not only is there enough ghee, it comes all the way up to your elbows as you eat it. So that's again a expression of the abundance that Andal is describing in this. Sri Aurobindo goes on to say, there's a sunlit path as well as a gloomy one, and it is the better of the two, a path in which one goes forward in absolute reliance on the mother, fearing nothing, sorrowing over nothing. Aspiration is needed, but there can be a sunlit aspiration, full of light and faith and confidence and joy. If difficulties come, even that can be faced with a smile. And he also says, the true key has been given to you in the right kind or condition of meditation, a state of inner rest, not of straining, of quiet opening, not of eager or desperate pulling, a harmonious giving of oneself to the divine force for its working, and in that quietude, a sense of the force working and a restful confidence allowing it to act without any unquiet interference. Now that condition is the beginning of the psychic opening. And this is something that a great mystic poet of present-day Maharashtra region, Jnanadeva, I'm sure you've all heard of this saint called Jnanadev. He's also written Jnaneshwari. He talks of this and he says, Jnanadeva Mauna. Mauna means silence. Japa Mala Antari. Antari means inside, internal. These words also sound similar. Japa Mala is a rosary, a little jap mala. Where is that jap mala? Inside, right? And holding it, Dharoni Shri Hari Jape Sada. Hold on to that japamala inside you, which is nothing but the japamala of your breath. Hold on to it and keep doing japa or repeating the name of the divine, surrender to the divine, remembering the divine constantly. And that is the key to it. Jnanadeva Mauna. Jnanadeva Mauna, Mauna. Jnanadeva Mauna, Mauna. Japamala Antari, Japamala Antari. Jnanadeva Mauna, Mauna. Japamala Antari, Japamala Antari. Dharoni Shri Hari Jape Sada. Dharoni Shri Hari Jape Sada. Jape Sada. Ekatattva nama dridadhari mana. Ekatattva nama dridadhari mana. Ekatattva nama nama dridadhari mana. Harichi karuna ye illa tusi. Harichi karuna ye illa tusi. Ye illa tusi. Ekatattva nama dridadhari mana. Harichi karuna ye illa tusi. Ye illa tusi. Ekatattva nama dridadhari mana. Te Ram sope re Rama Krishna Govinda. Rama Krishna Govinda te nama sope re, Rama Krishna Govinda, Rama Krishna Govinda, vachesi sadgata, jape sada, vachesi sadgata, jape adi, jape adi, ekatattva nama dridadhari mana, ekatattva nama, ekatattva nama, ekatattva nama, dridadhari mana. Dridadhari mana, ekatattva nama. There is only one tattva, the name and the form. Hold on to it tight, is what Jnanadev has also told us. This, again, what Sri Aurobindo says about the divine, the path of surrender, the sunlit path. If they can achieve and preserve the attitude of the central surrender, if they can rely wholly on the divine and accept cheerfully whatever comes to them from the divine, then their path becomes sunlit and may even be straightforward and easy. He also goes on to say, and give us, because we are all thinking beings, we need chavis for everything, we need keys for everything. The toolkit, the cheat sheet, how do I open the door, right? And possibly sometimes we also insist on instant solutions, because it's a time of instant coffee, instant gratification. So he also, the epitome of compassion, Sri Aurobindo tells us, solution to break the law of ignorance. There are constant fluctuations, persistent disappointments, innumerable falls and failures. No path of yoga is really easy or free from these difficulties or fluctuations. The way of bhakti is supposed to be the easiest. No path of yoga is really easy or free from these difficulties or fluctuations. The way of bhakti is supposed to be the easiest, but still, we find constant complaints that one is always seeking but never finding. And even at the best, there is a constant ebb and tide. Milana and viraha. Milana and viraha, meaning the coming together and separation, joy and weeping. Happens to all of us, isn't it? Life is a mosaic of all of this. Ecstasy and despair. If one has the faith, or in the absence of faith, the will to go through. So he's probably referring to Ichha Shakti and Shraddha. Shraddha Shakti, both of them, to complement each other. So if one has the faith, or in the absence of faith, the will to go through, one passes on and enters into the joy and light of the divine realization. If one gets some habit of true surrender, then all this is not necessary, right? And then he goes on to describe the necessity of complete transformation. But these vicissitudes, these ups and downs of life, which defines the fabric of human life, which is, if you believe that somebody who you believe is absolutely free of worries, tension, but that's just an illusion. I think anyone who's taken this human birth would have their share of ups and downs. And here we go to another great poet of a little more modern India, Rabindranath Tagore. You've all heard of him, right? There's a beautiful composition of his where he actually juxtaposes all of this. And he says, Mamochitte niti nritte keje nache, the being within me. How is it? Niti nritte, how is it always? It is dancing. Nritte keje nache, and how is it dancing? Tata thoi thoi, tata thoi thoi, tata thoi thoi. And then he says, life, hasi kanna, you may have happiness, you may have sadness. Hira panna, dole bhale, you may have diamonds and precious stones, and you may have good and bad. But similarly, he goes on, bhalo mondo, tale tale, every beat, you may have good, you may have the opposite of good also happening. And then he says, nache janma, nache mrityu, even in life and death. So what can be better than being in that ecstatic state of taking everything in life as a prasad, as a gift, as the grace of the divine, and continuing. You may enjoy this Bengali song. Anybody else who knows Bengali here? You can join in if you know it, if you feel like singing. Like you did va va va, you'll have to sing tata thoi thoi, tata thoi thoi. Yes? So it'll wake you up a little more. I hope you're not finding this boring. Mama chitte niti nritte ke je nache. Mama chitte niti nritte ke je nache. Tata thoi thoi, tata thoi thoi, tata thoi thoi. Mama chitte niti nritte ke je nache. Tata thoi thoi, tata thoi thoi, tata thoi thoi. Tari shange ki mrudonge shoda baje. Tata thoi thoi, tata thoi thoi, tata thoi thoi. Tari shange ki mrudonge shoda baje. Tata thoi thoi, tata thoi thoi, tata thoi thoi. Hasi kanna hira panna dole bhale. Kape chonde bhalo mondo tale tale. Nache janmo, nache mrityu, pache pache. Nache janmo, nache mrityu, pache pache. Tata thoi thoi, tata thoi thoi, tata thoi thoi. Ki anando, ki anando, ki anando. Divoratri nache mukti, nache boldo. Ki anando, ki anando. Divoratri nache mukti, nache boldo. Shetoronge, chutironge, pache pache. Tata thoi thoi, tata thoi thoi, tata thoi thoi. Mama chitte niti nritte ke je nache. Tata thoi thoi, tata thoi thoi, tata thoi thoi. So another perspective of the same sunlit path. The path may have its shadows, darkness, thorns, flowers, all of it, velvet flowers and then a small bed of thorns. But how do we deal with it? And then Sri Aurobindo goes on to explain the necessity of complete transformation. In all yoga, there are three essential objects to be attained by the seeker. One, union or abiding contact with the divine, liberation of the soul or the self, the spirit, and a certain change of the consciousness, the spiritual change. And then he also goes on to describe, as in the Bhagavad Gita, as Sri Krishna says, there are many paths, but in the 12th chapter he says how Bhakti Yoga is probably easier for all of us. So Sri Aurobindo goes on to elaborate that. For instance, by bhakti one becomes close to the divine, becomes intensely aware of him and arrives at knowledge, for the divine is the truth and the reality. There are many entrances, but he's talking of the entrance of devotion, bhakti. By knowing him, says the Upanishads, one comes to know all, isn't it? What is it? That knowing which I can know everything. The Chandogya Upanishad says that. So bhakti actually also leads to being able to know everything. And one comes to know all. By bhakti also the will is led into the road of the works of love, karma yoga, and the service of the divine, and the government of the nature and its acts by the divine, and that is karma yoga. By bhakti also comes spiritual change of the consciousness and the action of the nature, which is the first step towards its transformation. So it is with all the other lines of the fourfold path. but he probably suggests that this is slightly more accessible for us. And he also says, but it may be that there are many obstacles in the being to the domination of the mind and heart and will by bhakti and the consequent contact with the divine. The two great activity of what? Fill in the blanks. Of our minds, right? Which works like a non-stop radio station going on and on and on and on, 24/7, perhaps more. So, the two great activity of the intellectual mind and its attachment to its own pride of ideas, its prejudices, its fixed notions and its ignorant reason may shut the door to the inner light and prevent the full tide of bhakti from flooding everything. And yet, he says, eventually, when you keep doing this, it will, in the end, the divine's working will appear and one will be able to live in the presence. And there is a nice, beautiful bhajan of Kabir ji. It's something very simple, and yet maybe you can learn this also if you like. If you feel like you can learn this, it's a very short but a very simple bhajan. Govinda Hari Hari Gopala Hari Hari Radha Ramana Hari 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 Govinda Hari Hari Gopala Hari Hari Radha Ramana Hari 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 bolo Hari bolo bhai Hari na bolega to Ram duhai Hari bolo Hari bolo bhai Hari na bolega to Ram duhai तेरा मेरा कह कर क्या कर पाया हरि के भजन बिन झूठ कमाया तेरा मेरा कह कर क्या कर पाया हरि के भजन बिन झूठ कमाया काहे को पढ़ता किन किन किताब don't stop reading books but he says काहे को पढ़ता किन किन किताब हरि नाम लेने से सब कुछ होता काहे को पढ़ता किन किन किताब हरि नाम लेने से सब कुछ होता कहत कबीर सुनो भई साधु 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 हरि गुण गावत वैकुंठ जावत हरि गुण गावत जाव हरि गुण गावत वैकुंठ जावत गोविंद हरि हरि गोपाल हरि हरि राधा रमण हरि हरि हरि. What's the meaning? Would anybody like to translate it to make it a little more participative? Deven, you want to try, or anybody? Tera mera hari hari bolo hari na bolega to Ram duhai. It's like, what? How will I translate that? It says, you're doomed if you don't. Well, let's not stick to that. But he says, tera mera. You know, we often say, this is yours, this is mine. Tera mera kehkar kya kar paya? Translation? What have you been able to achieve by saying you, yours, your idea, my idea? Hari ke bhajan bin jhoot kamaya. Jhoot is lies, falsehood. What you've earned is probably falsehood if you're not anchored in the divine. And kahe ko padta, well, not for young students, but sometimes we go into too much of the dots and T's of trying to have an intellectual debate, discussion, argument. So kahe ko padta kin kin kitab, hari naam lene se sab kuch hota. So leave it to the divine, surrender, have that faith. Like the monkey mind, like the cat. Huh? So be absolutely tension free and let him. And then he also says, Hari gun gavat vaikuntha javat. Vaikuntha is the proverbial heaven, but the sunlit path says you don't have to go. By doing that, this is indeed, so by just being anchored in it, so if you can have this constant, instead of the constant chatter of the 24/7 monkey mind if we have this constant remembrance of the names of the Lord. And there's a very beautiful song of another great mystic saint of India that I've been also very, very deeply inspired by. There are so many. I think all of these just reinforce, and so one is somebody called Anand Mahima. Have people heard of her? Somebody who was in every way beautiful, in every possible, whatever she gave us. So she would say something that wherever you are, we all have this habit of carrying a little dabba, a little box in which you keep mishri. What is mishri? Small candy crystals of, we say kalkanda also to it, right? Small crystals of kalkanda. We keep it and then you once in a while put a piece of it, it just feels good. So once in a lecture she goes to a place and she's giving a little discourse and she tells them that keep this kalkanda mystery of the names of the Lord. So let your tongue always have Rama or whatever name. Jo naam chaho wo naam bolo, prem se bolo, bhav se bolo, Govind bolo, Gopal bolo, Ram Ram bolo, Harinam bolo, Allah, Malik, Isha, Nanak, Zoroaster, Mahavir, Buddhanam bolo. You'd say whatever name that you like, but keep it constantly on your tongue, in your heart, in your eyes, in your mind. So you keep doing the work that you have to do, but let this be the constant refrain. And there was somebody like us, probably, who heard the talk. 2 years later, she goes back to the same place. And he's carrying this beautiful box of mishri. And he says, I followed your advice and I have this full of candy. And the epitome of grace and compassion that she was, she again repeated the story. So this is a story that I feel can really get tattooed in our hearts and minds, and we can really carry this little box of the sweetness of the name of the Lord. How are we doing on time, Uma? Another 10 minutes maybe? 10 minutes. So, Sri Aurobindo, then there's a beautiful letter to, again, another favorite of mine, and I'm sure a favorite of all of yours, Dilip Kumar Roy. I'm sure you've heard his bhajans. He was the one who composed the music for this movie called Meera, which was back then made, which had M.S. Subbulakshmi, Bharat Ratna M.S. Subbulakshmi starring as Meera. So he writes various things here. I spoke of strange ideas in connection with what you said about peace and cheerfulness being obstacles in the yoga because they are incompatible with an ardent longing for realization. So this is the misconception possibly that even Dilip Kumar Roy has written to him. Peace was the very first thing that the yogins and seekers of old asked for, and it was a quiet and silent mind, and that always brings peace, that they declared to be the best condition for realizing the divine, not one which is the opposite of it. A cheerful and sunlit heart is the fit vessel for the Ananda, and who shall say that Ananda, or what prepares it, is an obstacle to the divine union? This is a bold and beautiful and direct question and an instruction for all of us that Sri Aurobindo asks Dilip Kumar Roy. The Gita especially says, practice the yoga with an undespondent heart, anir vinna chetasa. So, and then he goes on to explain it. In faith and confidence and joy, on the quiet and sunlit path towards the home of light and Ananda. This is again by Sri Aurobindo, a message for one of his disciples on her birthday. The mother says, it is true that the path is very long, but for one who follows it with sincerity, it is really very interesting. So never a dull moment, right? So I think as we now move towards the conclusion, there's somebody called Nagin Doshi, who was again somebody in the ashram who stayed. And there are some interesting, Sri Aurobindo tells him there is such a sunlit or golden path, but it is difficult for man with the pull of his lower nature to follow it. But Nagin Bhai was a little persistent, right? And he asks whether it's possible. And Sri Aurobindo says, it is not impossible, but only one or two have been able to do it, which proves that it is not easy back then. But as the world is evolving, it is definitely, as all the saints say, definitely well within our reach, provided we aspire with sincerity. And even if the practice, the effort is most important, whether we get success or not. Can't one do something for a smooth transformation of one's external nature with no serious revolts, attacks or falls, asks Nagin Bhai. Sri Aurobindo replies, yes, but it's not easy. It needs either a calm, resolute will governing the whole being or a very great samatha. Samatha is equanimity, equipoise, to have a quite smooth transformation. If they are there, then there are no revolts, though there may be difficulties, no attacks, only a conscious dealing with the defects of the nature, no falls, but only setting right of wrong steps or movements. So this is what he says, and finally, he's still not satisfied. Naginji, since my being wants the sunlit path, kindly enlighten me how to make it possible, is the question. What does the Lord say? Sri Aurobindo says, it is possible if you, 1, can get free of the vital demand, 2, regard the difficulties of the nature calmly and dispassionately, as if some defects of a machine that has to be set right, the being that uses the machine remaining fully dedicated to the mother. And I thought, wasn't that a beautiful message? There's also another song, maybe I'll see if there is time to, this is by another great mystic saint of India who lived in the present day Andhra. He was a great devotee of Balaji, Venkateshwara, the Lord of Tirupati. He was called Annamayya. Have you heard of him? And he's written such beautiful poetry, poems, songs, all soaked in divinity. This one is again a very beautiful one, a very bold one, which talks about how we're all equal. Why? Because it's that same divinity which pervades all of us. He says whether there's no difference of high and low. Sri Hari is Vishnu, the divine, these are just names. He says he's the same spirit to all of us because he is indeed the same one indwelling spirit in all of us. And he says sleep is same to all. Is it different for a king? Is it different for a servant? Everybody has the same sleep. Similarly, whether it is a so-called upper caste person or a person from a so-called lower caste, Chandala or a Brahman, the earth that they live on, isn't it the same? And then, whether it's an elephant or a dog, the sun shines alike for both of them. And then he makes a very bold statement, because we often tend to be a little, the ego of being, the arrogance of believing that we are on the righteous path. Morality also sometimes is dangerous, no? To believe. He goes on to say, for the good and the bad, Lord Venkateshwara alone is the savior. It's a bit of a folksy tune. You can join in. You know which one? Brahma Mokat. Tandanana ahi, tandanana puri, tandanana bhale, tandanana bhale, tandanana bhale, tandanana. Brahma Mukate para, 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 Brahma Mukate. Kanduvagu heenadikamu lindu levu, andariki Shri Hari antaratma, indulo jantu kulamu inta okate. అందరికి శ్రీహరే अंतरात्मा ओ हरे अंतरात्मा तंदनाना पुरी तंदनाना भले तंदनाना अहि तंदनाना भले तंदनाना भले तंदनाना కడిగియే నుగు మీద కాయు ఎంట ఒకటే పుదమిసు నకుము మీద బోలయు నెంటొకటే కడు పుణ్యలను పాపకర్ములను సరిగావ జడియు శ్రీ వెంకటేశ్వర నామం ఒకటే హరినామం ఒకటే నీ నామం ఒకటే తందనానా అహి తందనానా పురి तंदनाना भले तंदनाना भले तंदनाना भले तंदनाना ब्रह्ममुकटे पर ब्रह्ममुकटे पर ब्रह्ममुकटे पर ब्रह्ममुकटे पर ब्रह्ममुकटे Brahman is that divine Parabrahma. Ukate means only one. That is it is just one which is there in all these forms. And of course, how can we come to the end without referring to Gita ji? Because the core message there also is about surrender. It's probably the most practical, the most appropriate, the most relevant book for anybody, whether it's a management person battling corporate wars in a room, whether it's a political issue, whether it's a person at home trying to negotiate things at the family level, whether it's a child, teacher, you take any possible context. I think the Bhagavad Gita is something that gives absolute crystal clear possibilities. It's a manual which can be applied to any situation across space and time. He finally says, Sarva dharman parityajya mamekam sharanam vraja aham tvam sarva papebhyo mokshayishyami ma shuchaha. Abandon all duties, even our arrogance to thinking this is my duty, even dharma. He's not said leave all these, even dharma, which is worshipped everywhere. He says even abandon that, but abandon all duties and simply surrender to me. Because then what you do will be, as Mother right in the beginning says, Sri Aurobindo says, it will be something that it'll be an impulsion from within. You don't have to think. It doesn't have to come from your mental construct of this is my duty, this is not my duty, because you'll spontaneously be driven by the divine to do what is the right thing. Abandon all duties and simply surrender to me alone. I shall liberate you from all sinful reactions. Our reactions are sinful, isn't it? We sometimes get angry, we get impatient, it invokes insecurity in us. I think it happens to all of us, and that is what we have to constantly be cleaning every day. And that is where the Bhagavad Gita also has another beautiful shloka in the chapter 2, the last 18 shlokas, which are known as, people call it the gist of the Bhagavad Gita, the Sthita Pragya. What is the definition? How can we be on the sunlit path? After all, a Sthita Pragya is on the sunlit path. And this is very beautiful. It says, just as a very calm, placid ocean, it has so many rivers and spate and flood, brimming, absolutely flooded, flowing into it. But what happens to the ocean? Does it start jumping up and down? It's able to take it all with a very calm sense of balance, equipoise. And similarly, all these desires, we are humans, we do have the sensory, karmendriya, jnanendriyas, all the sensory organs, which may again create little storms. But then let that being inside be so settled, so sorted out, that everything absolutely comes into that calm state or space of complete equanimity, equipoise. Apuryamanam achala pratishtham samudramapaha pravishanti yadvat tad तद्वत् कामयं प्रविशन्ति सर्वे स शान्तिमाप्नोति न कामी. And as we finally conclude, there's a small story of Mirabai. She was a princess, a royal princess who went to the streets, driven by that great passion, madness for her love for the divine. And so people thought it a little unbecoming, isn't it? Because your roles, they think that you're supposed to do this. There are certain constructs, stereotypes that society transposes on all of us. So she was not found to be worthy of being there by the general people there. Probably they were not wrong. They were doing it according to their Shraddha, their understanding. So she was driven out of Chittorgarh, and then she's a wandering mendicant, but she doesn't change. She's still like that little girl, whether tattered clothes or royal finery, jewelry, everything. And she finally has done all her peregrinations, her walking, and she finally comes to a place on the coast of Gujarat called Dwarka, right? And she's there. And then a group of people, because after she leaves, a lot of times, these are occult things, we may not understand the intellectual basis of it, but if there is faith, you do realize that her leaving that place brought a host of bad happenings there in Chittorgarh. There was famine, there was a lot of deaths, a lot of crises, problems. And so some of the wise men there, the elders of that place, decide to come to Meera and they repent. They feel that we've done a grave mistake in being so bad to you and driving you out of here. So they go and they sit, they fold their hands, request her to come back. And they say that there's a lot of suffering, there's a lot of pain, please come back. And she, again, being the ocean of compassion, is moved. And she hears them, she doesn't say no to them. She sings a song, Hari Tum Haro Janaki Peed, O Lord. And she talks of surrender, how Gajendra, the elephant king, who was actually his leg was caught by the crocodile, and how he surrenders. And Vishnu immediately comes and saves him, Hari. Similarly, Prahlad, he also gives the example of Draupadi, how she is insulted, but then she prays to the Lord, and Lord immediately comes to rescue. And she beseeches the Lord to come and save humanity. And it is believed that after the song, she walks into the Garbhagriha, the sanctorum of the temple of Dwarkadish, and she just dematerializes. She becomes one with the divine. And so we'll end with that. And then maybe chants of Anandamayi, Chaitanyamayi, Satyamayi, Parame, if you all feel like it. Hari Tum Haro Jan Ki Peed, Hari Tum Haro Jan Ki Peed, Draupadi ki लाज राखी तुम बढ़ायो जीर, द्रौपदी की लाज राखी तुम बढ़ायो चीर हरि, तुम हरो जन की पीर। भक्त कारण रूप नर हरि, धर्यो आप शरीर। हरिण कश्यप मार लीनो, धर्यो नाहिन धीर हरि, तुम हरो जन की पीर। बूढ़ते गज राज राख्यो, कियो बाहर नीर। दास मीरा लाल गिरिधर, दास मीरा लाल गिरिधर। दास मीरा, दास मीरा लाल गिरिधर। दास मीरा लाल गिरिधर। दुख जहाँ तहाँ पीर हरि 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 हरि, तुम हारो जन की पीर। आनंदमयी चैतन्यमयी सत्यमयी परमे। आनंदमयी चैतन्यमयी सत्यमयी परमे। आनंदमयी चैतन्यमयी सत्यमयी परमे।
I think we need one more applause. Thank you, dear ma'am. It was such a beautiful rendition of many great sages, bhajans, songs. You made the day. The fifth day was complete. It's whole. It's very beautiful, and I thank Ma'am, it's like Sunlit Path's Bhajan Mandali. We enjoyed the day, and Sunlit Path can be taken as musical way also. I think it's the first kind. She has started the first kind musical composition of Sunlit Path. And we thank ma'am in spite of her heavy schedule and busy commitments. She came, she accepted, and she came here to give the talk and to complete our integral yoga week. We thank you from bottom of our heart. Thank you, ma'am. And we thank Auroville Foundation, Ministry of Culture for supporting and collaborating for 150th celebration of Sri Aurobindo's sesquicentenary. And thanks for each one of you from the day one who was with the team, as a team, and for Integral Yoga Week to take this beautiful form. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I request Helmut sir, please come and give the memento to ma'am, please. Please.